everyone, and welcome to Finance 101, a brand new series brought to you by the Macquarie University Applied Finance Society's podcast, FinTalk. In this series, we'll break down the essentials of personal finance into bite-sized, easy-to-follow episodes. I'm your host, Shreya, the podcast director of the Applied Finance Society, and today we're thrilled to have a very special guest joining us. A powerhouse in the world of finance, Professor Elizabeth Sheedy is a distinguished member of the Macquarie Business School faculty, part of the Department of Applied Finance. This year, she'll be shaping the minds of future leaders in the Master of Banking and Finance program. Her impressive teaching portfolio includes the Master of Applied Finance and the Global MBA, where she's inspired countless students over the years. But her impact doesn't stop in the classroom. Elizabeth has made waves with her groundbreaking research. Starting with risk management and the culture of financial institutions, she has now turned her attention to household finance, diving into topics like financial resilience, the home ownership challenge, and the complexities of debt. Her passion for understanding and improving the financial decision-making of young adults makes her a perfect guest for our podcast. And did we mention, she is not just an expert in theory, but she's also a mother to 4 young adults, bringing a unique blend of academic expertise and real-world wisdom to the conversation. Welcome to FinTalk, Elizabeth. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Shreya. I really appreciate this opportunity to share a little bit about what I've been learning.
Yes, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. So in today's episode, we'll be talking about superannuation. We'll cover why it's important to pay attention to your super early on, how to ensure you're maximizing contributions, and tips to optimize your fund for long-term growth. For anyone who's just starting out on their financial journey or aren't too well-versed in superannuation, it essentially is a long-term savings plan for retirement. But for many students and young professionals, including myself, retirement can often feel like something too far off to think about. So could you explain a little bit more about superannuation and why it might be important to take an active role in managing your money now rather than letting it sit idle in your super fund?
Okay, happy to do that. So in Australia, we have a system of compulsory superannuation, which forces every worker to have money set aside for their retirement, which I can appreciate when you're 20, just seems ridiculously far away. But all the more reason because, as you know, returns compound. So even though you might not be earning a huge amount of money now as a student or, a recent graduate, that money that is sitting in your superannuation account is going to be compounding, it's going to be receiving returns, and really importantly, superannuation has a lot of tax benefits, so the returns in your superannuation fund are not getting taxed. So it's one of the best investments anyone could ever have, and it's going to be compounding up probably 50 years until you retire. So small amounts of money now can potentially make an outsized difference to your lifestyle when you end up retiring. So it's worth taking, 20 minutes now to ensure that everything is running smoothly.
Yes, the fact that your super is managed by an automated system makes a lot of people believe that they don't really need to look into it. But like you said, checking in every now and then just to make sure that things are running smoothly can be a very healthy practice. So, moving on, employer contribution is one of the most important components of your super, if not the most important. So, I think obviously most people know that their employer pays a percentage of their salary into their super. So how does that actually work, and what's the best way to make sure that you're receiving your super contributions correctly?
Okay, so when you start with an employer, normally you fill in some paperwork and you are either assigned into a superannuation fund or you can choose your own superannuation fund. So that's a first step, just to complete that paperwork. And then it's very important to give the super fund your tax file number, because that means that you're going to maximise the benefits for you depending on your tax circumstances. Once that is in place, the employer should then be paying 11.5% of your salary, at least. Some employers actually pay more. And that money should automatically be going into your super fund. And most employers will do that every pay cycle. If you pay it fortnightly, then you should see that. It'll be on your pay slip. You'll see that a certain amount of money is going into super, and you can also, you should have access to your superannuation account details, and you can very easily have a look at your super fund, and you should be able to see those regular amounts being paid in by your employer.
Okay, so keeping an eye on our payslip and checking your super account regularly is key. But what if something seems off? What should someone do if they suspect that their employer isn't paying them correctly?
Okay, so it's sad but true that there are some unscrupulous employers that are not doing the right thing by their employees, and perhaps even more likely if it's an international student. So it is worth checking. Now, the way to approach this is actually through the website of the Australian Tax Office, and they have a lot of useful information. It's actually a four-step process.
It's good to know that there are steps in place to fix these issues. So, moving on, we know that our super is important, but not all super funds are the same. There are industry funds, retail funds, and self managed super funds, just to name a few, each with different fees, investment options, and benefits. Choosing the right one can make a huge difference in how much you end up with down the line. So, what should people actually be looking into when comparing these funds?
Okay, so I think self-managed super funds, that's something for people that have a lot of money in their super fund. We're probably talking, $1 million or more. Then there's public sector funds. So if you work for the government, then you will automatically be enrolled into a public sector super fund. The ones that you're more likely to come across are the retail and the so-called industry funds. And in general, I would highly recommend the industry funds over the retail because of the fact that the industry funds are not-for-profit. Okay? So they're not trying to make money for the shareholders of a bank or a financial institution. It's all about maximising for you as the member of the super fund. So there's a lot of very big ones. Big is, I would say in general, is good because in this kind of business, there are massive economies of scale. So larger super funds are typically more efficient and better managed, which is not to say that the sector is perfect, but as a generalisation, that's what I'd be going for.
But picking a fund is just the beginning. Once we've chosen one, the next step is making sure that it's actually performing well and not being eaten up by high fees. We've all heard how fees can chip away at our super over time. So, what are some simple ways to keep it optimized, both in terms of performance and keeping those costs down?
Yes. So the first thing to check is that it is indeed only one super fund. Okay. So this is a common trap that younger people fall into because they might have worked at a few different places, and so they have a couple of different super fund accounts, and that's just really wasteful. You're going to be paying more fees that way. So what you need to do in that case is consolidate into one, and that your current employer is putting money into that fund. Okay. So that's my first point. Another thing to watch out for is the issue of insurance. Okay, so what some people might not appreciate is that you can buy insurance cover. I'm talking here about life insurance, disability insurance. You can buy it pretty efficiently through your super fund. However, say for most people in their early 20s, it's probably not worth it because you probably don't have a mortgage yet. You probably don't have any dependents yet. So in the worst case, something terrible happened to you, it's not like you'd be leaving behind children that are going to suffer or something like that. So I would probably say for most people, particularly in their early 20s, I would make sure you don't have insurance because it's a waste of money to pay premiums unless you really need the insurance. It might be worth considering, say, if you are working in a very dangerous workplace, like on a construction site, that would be the only possible exception. But yeah, try and make sure that your insurance premiums are switched off. And then you want to think about the actual investment options. Okay. Now, If you're someone who's not particularly switched on to finances, my advice in that case would just be to go for the default options. Okay, so all super funds have to offer what's called a My Super product, and the My Super product is designed to suit the needs of most people and to have lower fees. So if you're in the mindset that you just want to set and forget your super and get on with your life, that's probably what I would recommend. However, you don't have to go with the default option. And if you're someone who's really interested in your finances, then you might want to be a bit more involved than that. Also, some people might want to play around with the mix of investments, how much shares, how much bonds, and you can certainly do that. However, I would advise caution. Okay, so often what happens is, so we're recording this podcast right now in an environment where the stock market has just fallen by 10%. Okay, so it's officially in correction territory. And often in that situation, there's a temptation. People panic and think, oh no, I've got to get out of shares. And, so they will reduce their investment in shares and shift it into cash. This is what we call a market timing strategy. Sad to say, very few people have good market timing skills. And I can think of many, many examples where that has worked extremely badly for people. And so often what happens is that people get out of the share market at exactly the wrong time, and then they get back into it at exactly the wrong time. So it's actually because you guys are young, you don't need to worry about this risk. You should be taking risk because, you've got probably 50 years till you retire. So don't be concerned about fluctuations in the stock market. That's normal, and you get a benefit by taking risk. You're earning a risk premium. You're going to get higher rewards over time. So don't panic, just relax and just ride it through. That would be my advice. So actually there is a danger that you can get too involved in your super fund. So it's a question of striking the right balance. Not too little involved, not too much involved.
All right, let's switch gears for a minute. For international students or anyone thinking about moving overseas long term, super might not be on the top of their mind. But what actually happens to an individual superannuation if they leave the country, or what options are available for accessing or managing these super funds?
Okay, so if you are planning to leave the country, there is a way of getting your super money, okay? So it's called the Departing Australia Superannuation Payment. And so this is really important, particularly for international students to know about. So if you've been working during your time in Australia, and money has been accumulating in a super fund, you can get access to it. You won't be able to apply for it until you've left the country. Okay. However, it's important before you leave, it's probably a good idea to go to this is all on the Australian Tax Office website, to search for information about this departing Australia superannuation payment, because it might be good you might need to download some paperwork before you go, and that will make it a lot easier when you're back in your home country or in your new country to be able to claim that payment. You might have to pay some tax on it, but you will get it.
Okay, so moving on to the last question for today's episode. We know that your super is a great way to save for the future, but it's not the only option. So, how does it fit in with those other investment choices like property, shares, or other savings accounts? And what might be the best way to balance your super with these other strategies to make sure that you're building yourself a strong portfolio?
Okay, so I guess the big difference with superannuation is relative to those other alternatives that you just mentioned, is that it does have it has tax advantages. But the downside is you can't access that money until you retire, which is a long way off. So I think it really comes down to some extent about what your plans are about home ownership. And we're in an environment at the moment in Australia where getting home ownership is quite challenging. So if that is important to you, to be a homeowner, then I would probably advise that you focus more on that as in the short term.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. A huge thank you to you, Elizabeth, for sharing such practical advice and taking the time for being here today. So, before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? Perhaps a key takeaway to help them stay on top of their super and make the most of it?
Look, I think I just come back to this point that it does seem so remote, the idea of retirement. So, and it's a very natural human bias that we tend to be overly concerned with the here and now. What are you doing tonight, and making sure that you meet the deadline for your next assignment. But your future self will thank you a million times over if you just spend, 10, 15 minutes occasionally checking that everything's okay with your super.
That's some great advice. And finally, to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate your support, and we'll catch you in our next episode. This podcast provides general information only and is not financial advice. The information shared may not be suitable for your specific situation. We strongly encourage you to seek personalized advice from a qualified financial advisor before making any financial decisions.